Hi everybody, Chris Krashisnik with eXp Realty and the Krashisnik Group. I am a full-service residential realtor, licensed in Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, and DC, and I love to help people buy and sell homes. I mainly work by referral. That is, people I know recommend me or recommend to their friends, family, and coworkers that they work with me or talk to me before they buy and sell homes, and then I guide them through the process. And I love that part of my job, and I love the face-to-face connection I get with those people. And I'm providing content on YouTube because this is kind of a way to do that with more people. It's a way to provide content to subscribers or to people who are interested in the process of buying and selling homes and property management and all of that stuff. And it gives us an opportunity. It makes it less complex. It makes it a little more digestible and less intimidating. And I think that's a good thing for your average person to know because there's a lot of wealth built in real estate. So please subscribe and share this content with everybody you know. It's probably a little bit light on the entertainment. It's probably a little bit disorganized on the information, but hopefully you get it, and I'm always trying to improve upon that. So, into the meat and potatoes of today's topic, which is the rent back. A rent back is not involved in every transaction, but in some transactions it's involved in, and I want to explain the buyer's side of that rent back, okay? A rent back means that you go all the way to settlement. We go to settlement, but the possession of the property does not change until agreed upon time because the seller needs possession of the property for a specified amount of time for whatever reason they need it for. Sometimes it's to finish the construction on their home. Sometimes the home they're buying is not going to settle till this date. Sometimes the seller just plain old does not have the ability to move out in a matter of days or in one day, and they need a week to 2 weeks to a month to make that process happen because of age or because it's a big farm and they've got a bunch of stuff we don't know, okay? But essentially, possession is not at settlement, it's somewhere down the road. We have to figure out how to protect both parties in that situation, okay? So, one of the main things to think of during a rent back is the relationship. It's two separate agreements, really. It's the sales contract and then the post-settlement occupancy agreement, which is, in effect, legally speaking, a lease. So it changes the relationship from buyer and seller to landlord and tenant. The buyer becomes the landlord and the seller becomes the tenant. That's important to know for a few reasons, but number one, if there's any damage to the property during the rent back, the buyer is responsible for it to an extent in some ways, and the seller is responsible for the other things. It almost inverses them. So in a purchase transaction, if the HVAC goes out during the transaction, the seller has to fix it. If in a post-settlement occupancy, if the HVAC were to go out while the seller was occupying the property and before or after settlement and before the end of the post-settlement occupancy, if the HVAC went out, the buyer would have to pay for it, okay? There are some things that the seller would be responsible for. If there was cosmetic damage to the home during the rent back, the seller would then be responsible for it. But if that cosmetic damage supposedly was before the rent back, the seller would not be responsible for it. And I'll get into that in a minute. But it changes that relationship, okay? The terms of the rent back. So the rent back would be on it's an actual separate addendum in most jurisdictions. And that addendum would give us the time frame, the rate, the deposit, and the penalty. Okay, so those are the meat and potatoes. The time frame would be whatever's negotiated, a day, a week, 2 weeks, 30 days, 60 days. Usually, if the buyer is getting a loan, the lender will not want to see a post-settlement occupancy of more than 60 days. So we almost never see over 60 days for a post-settlement occupancy. It's usually a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, okay? Which is not that important. What is more important is the rate that is being charged. So the rate is what the seller will pay for possession of that property to the buyer. Now that will get evened out on the settlement statement, okay? Because it's negotiated in the contract, it'll be part of the contract, and the fees will be adjusted for on your settlement statement. But the rate is typically whatever the buyer's monthly mortgage payment plus their HOA fees and stuff. But what the buyer's monthly mortgage payment is divided by 30, and that's how we get our per day rate. And then we extrapolate that out, and that's our fees. If there's a penalty, or if the seller stays too long in the property, typically it's negotiated that fee doubles, or there's a drastic increase to incentivize the seller to leave, okay? The one thing I would like to say about the rate is that in a very competitive seller's market where you see a lot of multiple offers, it's not uncommon for buyers to give the rent back for free, okay? Which is not ideal, but when everybody's giving away a free 2-month rent back, and they win the lottery on multiple offers, you kind of have to also compete with those offers. We're getting out of that market right now. We did that quite a bit. I wouldn't say quite a bit, but we did see those times last year, in the last 2 years, but we're not seeing that as much anymore since the market has come down to more normal conditions. The other thing to mention is a deposit. So just like any rental situation, there's a deposit that's going to be held for damages. Usually that deposit is held by the title company. And this is why it's important to do 2 walkthroughs at the end of the transaction. You're supposed to do 1 walkthrough before settlement, and then note any cosmetic damages and note the repairs that are part of the contract to purchase were made, okay? Because if any cosmetic damage or anything is done after settlement, the seller's not responsible for that. It's just the deposit. The only thing you can really use the deposit on the rent back for is if there's cosmetic damages or anything like that. So usually that's a couple $1,000, and or whatever a month's rent is on that transaction. So to recap, the length, the rate, the deposit, and the penalty. And we need to have 2 walkthroughs. Do we understand? Okay. The last part of the rent back is, once we've gone through that period, we've done the initial walkthrough, we've done the final walkthrough, then the buyer has to contact the listing or the title company and say, fine, the property checks out. We release the deposit, the security deposit, to the seller, and that often gets overlooked, but we try not to forget about that in most scenarios. So that concludes the whole rent back thing and pretty much our buyer series. Last thing here, this is a personal note. You'll notice that I'm wearing my Rattlers gear. I don't have a collared shirt, and I don't have a polo shirt or something like that on. I got my Rattlers gear on. This is EP Rattlers. They're the wrestling club that my family primarily trains at. And when I'm not selling houses or chasing kids or growing things in the garden or getting into some type of trouble, I'm trying to coach and help out at Rattlers. It's a great place where kids can train wrestling and strength training and stuff year round. So if you're a brand new wrestler, if you want to get your kid involved in wrestling, or if your kid is going to national level tournaments, Rattlers has practices that your kid would fit in well at. And I love that organization and I love the sport of wrestling, and I try to support not only the sport of wrestling but all athletics, and not only Rattlers but all local wrestling clubs. I try to do what I can to help those programs out, because I believe sports and athletics, in particular wrestling, are a microcosm of life, and they prepare our young men and women for the challenges, the adaptability, the adversity, the physical and mental challenges that they're going to need to be successful human beings in the future, and I love supporting them. So, in my support of them, Rattlers is holding a gun raffle on September 10th. There are 50 guns that are getting raffled. You only need to be present for 2 of the 50 prizes, and I will include the information below. But September 10th in the evening, there's going to be a big gathering, and we're going to barbecue, and we're going to have food, and there's all kinds of good stuff, and we're going to raffle off a bunch of guns to help Rattlers out and support these young men and women to go to national level competitions and all that good stuff. So please do me a favor, if you're so inclined, click the link below with the Rattlers raffle info, and we can spread that information out. Okay, this concludes the video. Sorry it went a little bit long. Thanks for tuning in for all the buyer series. Have a good day. Thank you.